there was another group of filmmakers that were chasing the Pepsi story, and they happened to be the guys that made McMillions. And so we were like, oh fuck, like
And
they're a big
McMillions was a smash hit, like zeitgeist
Emmy
documentary.
nominated, yeah, all that stuff. So the power of Netflix, like as you mentioned, is huge. It's just you really feel it when the random person you're meeting on the street has seen it and loved it. And it's like, wow, that is so weird and so cool. I'm coming on 2 years working with John, and I'm like, I think I'm at that moment that I think everybody in this business reaches where at some point, at least once, where you're like, fuck, I don't know if I have it in me to keep doing this.
This is a conversation with Nick Boak, one of the most successful young documentary producers in the world. Nick broke through with his feature documentary Ready for War, executive produced by Drake and David Ayer, which was acquired by Showtime and premiered to critical acclaim at the Toronto International Film Festival. More recently, he's produced the hit docu-series The Curse of Von Dutch for Hulu, and is just coming off the incredible release of Pepsi Where's My Jet, the smash hit docu-series for Netflix. We go deep into Nick's origins in Hollywood, how he broke into the industry and started building his career, how he got his first projects off the ground, what it's like collaborating with Netflix, and the advice he has for aspiring filmmakers and documentarians. This is Close Up with Cassius. I hope you enjoy.
I was always into performing. Like I was always in theater, music. Like I played trumpet and guitar. I was in like the a cappella group at my high school. I did musical theater. And actually, I don't know if you know this about me, but I was a bit of a child actor. I did like a few like commercial spots and voiceover things. I had an agent, and I was in the national tour of the Broadway show Ragtime when I was 10 years old.
No
Uh,
way. I had no idea. That's
yeah, it's kind of a fun fact. And so what's interesting though is that so when I went on that tour, it was kind of I mean, it was an amazing experience. It was like a big production. I toured around the country, got paid as a 10-year-old. But one thing that I did kind of realize is that like acting is a tough game. You know, like it was this big cast. There's like 30, 40 people in the cast, and they're all extremely talented, but they're touring the country. They're doing 8 shows a week. It's like a hustle, you know? And so when I got back to school, I was like auditioning, and I was kind of like, I don't know, like I'm going to this, grew up in Connecticut. So I was going to New York City to like audition and stuff. And I was like, I don't know if this is for me. Like, this is too much. I kind of just want to be a normal kid. And so when I got to high school, a friend of mine named John Carmen, who actually he's still a good friend. He's in the business. He's an editor. He edited the Fire Festival documentary.
Oh, that's cool.
Uh, yeah, really awesome guy. He was kind of the first kid in my high school that started making films. He got a camera and a computer, and started putting little sketch comedy videos on YouTube, kind of at the advent of YouTube when it was like brand new. And they were really funny, really kind of like a dark, twisted sense of humor. But everyone in our school loved them. And I was an actor. I was doing like the theater group in my high school, and I was like, John, you got to put me in one of your films. And he did. And from there, I kind of started helping him produce them in a way, you know, helping him. We did this little 3 episode series called Cool Cops. And I played the bad guy. I was like a Colombian drug cartel boss named Johnny Mufasa. And anyway, so I that was kind of where I got the bug for like transitioning from musical theater and stage performance to film. I was like, oh, this feels like the avenue that I've been looking for, that I'm interested in. And then I got into USC and felt that, you know, producing was an avenue that I really wanted to pursue because you had that control. It was like really like putting the team together and finding the way to like maximize the production and telling the story.
And Nick, really quickly, before you go on, so you applied to USC Film School with the intent to be a filmmaker. Like you had already in high school kind of arrived at that as your path.
Yeah, correct. Basically, I mean, I to be honest with you, I don't really know. I kind of just did it. I don't know that I was like, I think that I at that point I kind of had realized like I want to be a producer. Maybe I was thinking director, like, but just something in the entertainment world. And I just felt something about California felt like it was calling to me. And so when I applied, and I think my guidance counselor in high school was like, USC seems like a great fit for you, Nick. You should apply there. And I got really stoked on it. And actually didn't. I mean, it's probably too much information, but I didn't get in. Like right out of high school, and I transferred. But um, I applied saying, like I have this background in theater. I started getting into filmmaking with some friends, and LA is the place I've got to be. Um, and I got in, and and then the rest is history. Did the whole USC thing, worked at a talent agency after I got out, and then worked for two producers before going on to produce on my own.
And this is something that I feel like there's a wide range of opinions on in terms of the utility of film school.
Yeah.
Especially going in knowing that you want to be a filmmaker, that you will build a career in the entertainment industry. What would you say you got out of film school? Like, what role did it play, if any, in actually helping you build your career?
That's such a good question, because I tell people this a lot. Um, so when I got into the industry, I was, it's a brutal industry. I went right into being a talent agent assistant, just getting my ass kicked on a desk, just like I came out of USC with like starry eyes. I'm going to pursue my dreams of being a filmmaker, and I'm going to make it. I'm going to the talent agency. And then you get there and it's a bunch of like, it's just an intense kind of hostile environment, competitive as hell. Nobody really wants to see you succeed until you matter. um and then sorry, what was the question?
No, we're talking. I'm curious to know the role that film school played
Oh,
in
so
actually
okay,
helping
all
you
right.
build
So
your career. So, but really quickly before you dive into like what life was like at the agency, like what had you done at USC, and how did that relate to like what you saw as your next step being when you were graduating in terms of building your career?
okay, so the thing that USC gave me was I, it made me love film more than, like, I grew up loving film, but it really contextualized everything for me. It made me understand why I love film. It made me understand like how storytelling and filmmaking, just like, it's not as simple as like putting a camera in front of actors that are reading a script. There is so much more that goes into it, from you know the framing and the composition and the lighting and the sound and the production design. Like, everything is what I realized, how specifically tailored every little piece of a film is to create an emotive response from the audience. And I realized that I grew up watching film and TV, and film and TV is what shaped my worldview. So the idea that like I could tell stories and give a message to people was just so exciting to me. And it felt like that's the thing that I want to do and that I should do. So I would say that USC really reinforced my love of film. It gave me an understanding of like how to channel that, and just how films are made, just like the nuts and bolts of like how production works, and how to critically analyze a film, and know why it's good. And so the reason went into the agency and how tough it was and how like soul crushing the business can be, is because I don't think if USC had reinforced that love so much and made me just know how much I love this art and this craft, that I would have made it. I think that I would have gotten the shit kicked out of me and had my soul crushed, and not had the fortitude to like stick it out. And so I credit USC with really reinforcing my love and my passion for film.
I had a similar but different journey in that I went to USC to study business, but I discovered filmmaking while I was there, and I would also say that was the thing that I got the most out of my time at USC and in the film program, was that deep sense of love for the medium, and like that really sustaining conviction that this was the path that I wanted to commit this part of my life to.
Totally.
So I was actually really curious to know at what point, because you had an interesting entry into the industry from an acting and performing perspective as a kid.
Yeah.
and then you started experiencing more the filmmaking side of it in high school. You get to USC, you're maybe not 100% sure what role you want to play within the filmmaking team, the filmmaking apparatus. At what point does producing crystallize as something that you fell in love with and a career path for you?
I think that, so in my filmmaking classes, I found that, my films were not technically very impressive. They were a little, because when you're in the early stages of those classes, it's like you're doing everything. You're shooting it, you're editing it, you're writing the script, you're directing. And so I found that, like, technically speaking, my films were not that tight compared to some of the other kids in my class, but they were always entertaining and they got laughs and people were into it. And so I felt that, like, I knew I had an eye for good stories and for the components of a film that really speak to people. But I enjoy the process of putting it together much more than I do, like, figuring out how we're going to shoot this. Like, my films were very, like, straightforward in terms of the technical execution. Um, and I also talked to Dr. Casper was one of my professors at USC. You know him, real character. And when I was graduating, I was considering maybe going to doing the graduate program because I think Stark or the directing program. And I was like, maybe I want to be a director. And he was like, Nick, I think you're a producer. Like, I think if you were a director, you would have kind of already, like, gone down that path and been, like, doing this. Like, the way that he was like, the way that I see you interact with people and the way that I see your mind works, I think that you just need to get in the business and, like, go for it and just go for it, basically. He's like, don't waste your time with graduate school. Maybe you'll find your way into directing if that's what you want, but the way that I see you, I think you're a producer. And I think he was 100% right. And so that was, and I think that, I think that I was, like, in a way, I was probably like, I loved the USC experience so much that I was like, let me just continue to do this. Whereas I'm so glad that as hard as it was, the track that I took, I'm just so glad that I just went for it because, to your earlier point, I learned so much more about the actual business and how things work by going and spending a year at a talent agency, by going and working for two producers. I just got real experience that, like, you can't learn in a classroom.
And we'll definitely get into that. But I'm really curious because I feel like one thing I remember from when I started at USC was everybody thought they were going to be the next George Lucas or Steven Spielberg.
Of course.
I remember everybody I met pretty much wanting to be a director, at the beginning, like when they were freshmen. And then, like, as they went more throughout the program, I feel like people started finding different roles that they found more fulfilling or that they were better suited for. Everything, from editing, cinematography, I think the people who wanted to be music composers were pretty much the only ones who came into film school knowing that that's what they wanted to do. It wasn't behind the camera.
Right. Yeah.
But how would you describe what the role of a producer is?
How do I describe the role of a producer? So the simple analogy that I use for, like, people who aren't in the business is, if you look at a baseball team, the manager in the dugout is who's working with the players and watching coaching the game, every single game. That's the director. The general manager, who is, like, getting the manager, like, the players, he's working out the salaries, he's running the business of the game. I think that that's more like what the producer is. Basically, the producer's job is to give the director the tools and the resources that he or she needs to execute their creative vision. And it's to be the support for every single department head. I the thing that I love about being a producer is that I get to touch a little bit of everything and have an understanding of every component of the production, but let the department head or the expert of that field do their job and knowing that I've done my job and that they have everything that they need, um, and seeing them happy and thriving is like the best feeling of like success in my job. It's like kind of sitting back and saying like, okay, he's happy, she's happy, everybody's good, things are happening, the production is moving. That is just like the most amazing feeling
Yeah.
as a producer.
So you're graduating, you're deciding, okay, I'm going to go into the industry and not into graduate school, probably more focus on like a producing track. How does that lead you to working at a talent agency?
Kind of because like everybody was just like, just go do a year at the talent agency. It's going to be you will, because the agency is a hub of information, and like an agent's currency in the business is information. And so you see how projects are packaged, how an open writing assignment gets a writer attached to it from a studio and becomes a script, which then gets an actor attached to it or a director attached to it or both. And you just kind of see from the top line perspective how a project is made from the business side. Um, and it was also just like, it's a fast paced competitive environment, where you have to like learn to work hard and just be one piece of advice that someone at the agency gave me was be impressive. Whatever you do, just be impressive. And I was like, okay, that makes sense to me, because it's, as I said, it's just so busy there, it's so competitive. In order to stand out and in order to make a difference, you have to really be impressive and give a shit, you know. But I kind of knew going into the agency that I didn't want to be an agent. I just knew that I would also like, in addition to like learning the skills and learning how the business works, learning names, key players, all those things, that I would also make connections with producers through their offices by, the agent interfaces with so many producers and studio executives. Those doors are open to you and you start getting drinks with, this studio executive's assistant or this producer's assistant, and it just opens your world up. And so my next move after a year at the agency, I went to work for Chuck Roven.
Well,
And
but
that was,
really quickly, sorry,
yeah,
sorry to interrupt you, but no, just before we get there, because I think this is such an interesting point. Because from the outside, knowing that being a filmmaker and being a producer is your path, but then going to work at a talent agency feels counterintuitive. Like logically, it feels counterintuitive. Well, wouldn't you just go and start producing or go and work for a producer? But I think it's important to just emphasize the point that you made, which is the reason why it makes so much sense to go and work at an agency when you're right out of school or when you're looking to break into the industry and just kind of start kicking that door open is you do get exposure to so many different types of projects: film, TV, documentary, docu-series, unscripted, reality, like etc. You get to see the deal flow for so many different types of projects, and then you get the information advantage of like really from the inside of the system of Hollywood, really genuinely seeing how projects get put together. And
exactly.
then you also get from a networking standpoint, I feel like that's probably the biggest advantage is you get exposed to so many different types of people that, building a career in Hollywood seems to be largely a relationship enterprise. And that building block of like working at an agency and meeting a lot of people that are at similar and different levels of their careers is like one of the best ways to have doors open for you when you're like you just mentioned, I've done my year here, I've learned what I needed to learn from this, and now I'm ready to take my next step. So how did you navigate your exit from the talent agency, and how did you pick the place that you ultimately landed?
Yeah. Well, and just to piggyback off of something you just said right there, in terms of networking and meeting people, I would say that there is no singular path in Hollywood and in filmmaking, that you can say this is the path that you have to take to get to there. Every single person that goes in this business has a very different path. And so in addition to meeting people in different places, hearing the stories of how people got to where they are and hearing different people's paths was just really helpful for me in understanding how to navigate my own path. And so for my next step in my career, when I went to work for, I had interned at Atlas and Mosaic when I was at USC. A buddy of mine from my fraternity had interned there before, and I was like, "You've got." Basically, I at that point I knew I wanted to be a producer, and he told me that he interned at Atlas and worked at Chuck Roven's company, and Chuck produced The Dark Knight in 2008, and
Pretty
I
good.
was like, pretty good one.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was, I 2008 is when I went to USC, and so I was like, if I could have produced any movie in the last 20 years, it would be The Dark Knight because it made $1 billion in the box office and it was critically acclaimed. Heath Ledger won an Oscar, was nominated for many Oscars.
Mhm.
And so I was like, that's the one. I
And it
want to
hit
be
culture. It totally reshaped culture. Yeah, it hit the zeitgeist.
it completely. The I would say that the Christopher Nolan Batman series, the Dark Knight series, was the beginning of the reboot. I think that made everyone know it's like, oh, I can just reboot something and it's going to be amazing. Um, and I think it had a huge. I think that the Dark Knight and Iron Man were the two things that made superhero movies what they are today.
Right.
So anyways, yes, so it was a cultural touchstone, box office success, critical success. I want to be that kind of producer. I want to make that kind of movie. So naturally, when I saw the opportunity to intern at that guy's company, I jumped on it, went for it, and
And Nick, did that happen over the summer? Like, did you stay in LA to do that, or was that during your semester at SE?
that was while I was studying. It was during the semester. So I scheduled my classes. I had a lot of like night classes and I would go during the day.
Mhm.
Um, and so it was kind of a busy schedule. I was also doing the whole fraternity thing, being a pledge master. So, so
No,
it was
but
a busy.
that's a really I'm glad you bring that stuff up because like I think for so many people, they look at Hollywood and they're like, how can you ever break in? Like how do you actually kick that door open? And what's really helpful, I think, about this conversation and you sharing this experience with us is when you can find your way into an institution like USC, the advantages that it offers you is like you get to join a fraternity with people who just interviewed at Chuck Roven's company. So now you have like some way in there, if you are willing to work unpaid, like how interns do, right? And you kind of a path becomes clear to you that you get like little bites at the apple towards. So let's say let's say, you never got into USC. What do you think your path to get into an agency like, was it WME that you were at?
I was at ICM.
How would you have found your way into ICM and then Atlas if you hadn't gone to USC?
Oh man, great question. I mean, I know that like these places all when I was like looking, God, it's been so long since I've like looked for a job or an internship in the traditional way, but I recall that most of these places, like on the website, there's contact information or there's like places to submit your resume. There are like, there's plenty of ways to like cold call, if you will. Um, but I think that like the thing that was very useful about USC, and I'm sure that a lot of other universities have this, is like the career development program at your school should have at least some way into various companies or it's a really great question. I don't know because USC was just so freaking helpful
Yeah.
in that process. Like the career fairs, ICM, there was a career fair, and I also like mentioned that I knew someone who worked there, and they're like, "Oh, you know Leanne? Like, great! Like, let's get you an interview." So I think that, yeah, I guess I can't stress enough, like, because it's not like I wouldn't say I'm the most like well-connected person, and not especially not like where the family that I was born into, or I grew up in Connecticut. My dad's a lawyer. I had nothing to do with the film industry, but I managed to leverage any connection and friendship that I had to at least get some recognition, a foot in the door, an acknowledgement, and then from there, just worked my way in.
Yeah. And I think it's a really helpful point. The utility of like starting were you in the mailroom or were you on someone's desk when you first started at ICM?
It's a funny story. So I was interviewing for the mailroom, and so I was interviewing at ICM, and I actually got a job at APA, which is, kind of like a slight step down from ICM. And I told the guy at ICM, I was like, listen, I got this job, but I would hate to take that job without like considering, seeing if there's anything open for you guys. Like I'd rather be at your company. And he was like, well, there aren't any mailroom spots open. And I was like, well, is anybody's desk open? And he was like, come to think of it, there is, but he's like a department head and he's kind of tough. And I was like, well, why don't you let me interview and see how he feels about it? And he was like, okay. So I kind of like snuck my way into this interview. I
Thinking like
ended
a
up,
producer.
yeah. And I crushed this interview. I just came in so prepared. And I think the thing that sold him was that, I had no experience. Like I had, covered some desks when I was interning at Mosaic, like knew basically how to be an assistant, but I had no experience. I was
Relevant to note as well that like if you're a department head, you have a lot. There's like the assistant job is a really important one to allow you to do your like conduct business. And
yes,
typically they like to have someone trained in the mailroom, which is kind of like the lowest level at an agency. Like you're everyone's bitch if you're in the mailroom, but you do kind of
yeah,
get trained up a little bit in terms of how the agency operations work, so that by the time
exactly.
you get on someone's desk as their assistant, they know that you have some understanding of their workflow and how they like to do things.
Exactly. So like when you're in the mailroom, you're literally pushing a mail cart around the whole office. You learn every single person's name at the agency, every single department. You meet the assistants. You kind of just get, it's like a easy job. Like it's not difficult, but you from a very basic level understand how the agency works, who's important, what the departments are, and how they all work together. And so then from there, you usually go to the floater pool, which means you're like a substitute assistant. So when someone goes on vacation or they're sick, you jump in and cover their desk for a few days. Someone gets fired, something like that. And so I was able to actually skip the mailroom and the floater pool because I just had this killer interview. I like he was basically like, all right, well, so tell me like what's your favorite TV show right now? And I was like Breaking Bad. He's like, pitch me Breaking Bad as though you're gonna sell it in the room. And I went through a few different shows and movies that I had recently seen or loved, and I just pitched them to him. And I got and then I had to do like a coverage of this book. So this guy that I work for, he was their media rights. He was in their lit department. He represented a bunch of writers and directors, but he also did their media rights. So they represented the New York Times, and he worked with their book department. So he was just in the thick of it on all this shit. He gave me a 300-page book and told me to get him coverage by the end of the week. I stayed up all night, read this whole fucking book, did like a killer coverage.
And what's coverage?
Coverage is when you read a script or a book or a piece of writing and you give a brief summary, and also your opinion on it, whether you think that it translates into a film or a TV show and why. And so, because basically an agent or a producer gets so many submissions that they don't have time to read all of it. So they use their interns, their assistants, and their creative executives to read and filter through things to say, hey, this is really good. Check out the coverage. Let me know what you think. And then they're like, oh, this sounds interesting. And then they'll read the book or the script. And so I read this book. It's a huge book. It wasn't very good, and it was dense. But I read the whole fucking thing. Did like an amazing coverage. And I was like fresh out of USC, so I'd been writing. I was like in that paper writing mood of also like the stay up all night writing a paper mode. So I crushed it. And he was like, "This is incredible coverage. Like, I really think that you could do this. Like, I'm a little nervous about your inexperience, but what I'm so he was also firing his current assistant because he wasn't quite up to the task. So instead of training with his current assistant, I went around and trained, like just sat with a bunch of agents at the at the agent, or sorry, I went around and sat with a bunch of assistants at the agency who were good, like notably good assistants, and learned from them. I'm on my own. I'm working the desk.
But
Two weeks,
yeah, go ahead,
two
go ahead.
weeks later, I get fired.
No way.
Yeah.
Hi, quick break. Very quick. This isn't an ad read. Just a request, if you're enjoying this, to please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Thank you. Why?
Just because I was in way over my head, dude. I wasn't, I think that part of being a good assistant is like muscle memory. Like you're like dialing phones, you're sending emails. It's just like a process. And so everything, when you're learning it, it just takes that extra step of making sure you didn't have any typos and like dialing the phone number right, looping in the right people on the email. It was just like a lot to jump into a department head's desk. And so I was fired from my first job after about 2 weeks, and it was brutal. I also do think that I came in, as you mentioned earlier, everyone comes out of USC thinking they're going to be the next, Martin Scorsese or George Lucas, Steven Spielberg. I came out thinking I'm going to be the next Chuck Roven or, Jerry Bruckheimer or, Brian Grazer. So I think I went into it like feeling a little too casual, like everyone at the agency is like, they're sitting down, they're firing emails. I was like, this is gonna be great. I'm the man.
Like you felt that the work was beneath you?
mm, I didn't think it was beneath me, but I think that I probably felt like, oh, I made a mistake. What's all good. I'm new here. Whereas they don't give a shit. They're like, and so he was like, he sat me down. He's like, listen, I think you have all the potential in the world. You're really smart, but you just need a little more time in the oven. And so, so he fired me. And, but I got to skip the mailroom and I went down to the floater pool and I covered a bunch of desks. I ended up being put on this guy named Chris Smith. Um, he represents a lot of comedians, so comedy touring, but he also represents a lot of like public appearance celebrities. So he reps like Mike Tyson, right. Pamela Anderson, just some like really.
Dude, he helped us on this on the on the movie Alone at Night that I produced last year, where we got Pamela Anderson to play the town sheriff. That's so funny because I know we went through her personal appearances agent, not through like a normal agent or manager. That's so funny. So you work for that guy?
Yeah, Chris Smith.
That's crazy.
And so Chris was kind of notorious for being like, let me just preface this by saying Chris is an awesome, hilarious guy, but he's intense and he's kind of like like an old school, like when he gets mad, he's yelling at the top of his lungs and you can hear him down the hallway. He's throwing things off his desk. He's very passionate. But for some reason, we really got along and I helped him stay organized. And I think that, I went into like floating and covering his desk with this opinion that like, well, I'm not going to work for this guy. So like, I just don't get worked up about it when he loses his cool and like freaks out on you and just like stick it out. And yeah,
honestly,
we ended up getting along.
That's such a important insight. I think because what I've noticed in this industry is you're dealing with so many people that have weird personality quirks, that have like ego and politics are such a huge part of navigating relationships, work relationships, collaborations in this industry, that like it took me a while to wrap my head around what you're talking about in terms of like not taking things personally and just like kind of understanding people are gonna do things and like act a certain way, and as long as you're sure that it really doesn't reflect on what you've done and it's just them processing their own thing, we know we can't change people. So like if you're in a position where you do have to work with somebody like that, it's so important to just understand how to let shit just slide and let it roll off your back and not let it affect you or like add additional stress, because it's already such a stressful industry, and so many of these jobs are so stressful that like if you allow the personal stuff that other people are like struggling to process on their own, if you allow that to like further weigh on you, it can get unbearable. Like it's I've been in situations where it's like gotten to that point, and that's one thing that I've learned is just what you mentioned. Like if he's going to be screaming or turning up or whatever it is, like you learn to like let it not affect you, and kind of like you keep your tunnel vision, and it makes, I think, working in this industry much more viable, sustainable.
100,000%. Because so I think that that has actually been a struggle of mine, especially being an assistant for all those years to like high stress, high power people. Because I think I'm like an empath, and I absorb energy of people. When someone is feeling something, I feel it too.
Mm.
And so when my boss was like having a bad day, is angry, is pissed off, is upset, whatever it is, that energy would transfer to me. And I really had to learn to, as you said, kind of let it roll off your shoulder and let it go past you or around you or whatever. And so that is really good advice, is like, if you go into your day with a good attitude, knowing that you're doing everything that you can, whatever comes at you, like it is what it is. You can't take it too personally or get worked up about it,
And
especially if you're going to be a Hollywood assistant to
yeah.
start.
And the reason, just for context, the reason why I wanted to go so deep into this part of your career is because I do think it's one of the hardest parts is breaking into the industry, learning
Yeah.
how to launch your career, how to get your foot in the door. And in Hollywood, there it like the one saving grace of like the Hollywood system, which I think generally is deeply inefficient, and like not a great system, but there is this one time honored path of starting as an assistant or in the mailroom at a talent agency or at a studio, let's say, or at a production company, and like using that as the foundation for a career that goes in any other direction, so that's why I wanted to go and really unpack it with you.
Oh yeah, totally. Because there is this thing that people get frustrated about. It's like you need experience to get the job, but how do you get the experience if you can't get the job? And I think that this is a business where you do need to start pretty early. Like you do need to get at least that one really solid internship, uh, and make the most of it. Don't just take it as an opportunity to get something on your resume. You really need to like make those connections while you're at that internship. And because having it on your resume is going to be helpful, but what's more helpful is having that person at that company vouch for you later on in your career and help you get a job.
So that's a beautiful segue into how you navigated from ICM to Atlas.
Okay, well, so but before we get there, I have to take a step back to when I interned there, and kind of going off of what I was just saying, that you have to really take the opportunity and like, don't be a pushy little annoying shit, but like make yourself useful, be impressive, and just be happy to be there. Um, so when I was at Atlas interning, they did this really cool thing where they did, what was it called? There was a name for it. I forget what it was, but basically they would have a lunch. It was just like an intern lunch where an executive from the company would have lunch with all the interns, and you could just ask whatever you wanted. And so Chuck Roven, who at the time was my like idol in terms of the producer that I wanted to have a career just like him, was doing the intern lunch. And I was like, I'm there. And everybody asked a question. And I asked Chuck, I was like, listen, Chuck, you are, you know, you're an incredible producer. You've been financially successful, critically successful. Um, you know, if there's anything you could have done differently, what would you do? And or something like that. And he told me, this was like so interesting to me at the time. He said, as a producer, you want your film to be, obviously, you want your film to be critically and commercially successful. You want to make money and you want the critics and the people to love it. If you make a movie that is commercially successful but not critically, it takes the sting off if at least you made some money on it. But if you make something that is critically and commercially unsuccessful, it is just soul crushing. And the only time in my career that that ever happened to me was when I read a script and I heard a pitch for a story and I just didn't really believe in it. Didn't really get me excited, but there was a big money offer for me. And I was like, that sounds cool. And what I learned from that was no matter what the paycheck is, if the project doesn't excite you, don't do it. And I was like, wow, that is like a really amazing sentiment coming from this like behemoth producer who is like clearly a financially driven and business minded producer. He was saying like basically saying have creative integrity. And so I just thought that was super cool. And fast forward to when I'm leaving ICM, I met with Andy Horowitz, who was an executive at the company, who I had done some coverage for as an intern, just kind of fostered a relationship with him. And I just got lunch with him, just saying like, what, I'm coming up on a year at the agency. I'm kind of starting to look out. Have you heard of anything out there? I'm interested in working at a production company or at a studio. Just like you're a plugged in person. Have you heard anything? And he was like, yeah, I'd love to take you out to lunch. And so we go out to lunch, and I guess he was kind of like feeling me out and seeing, just feeling me out and seeing how I presented. And then like somewhere in the conversation he was, well, actually, Chuck just fired his second assistant and he needs a new one. Would you be interested? And I was like, fucking of course I want to be Chuck's assistant. Like that is the one job in this town that I do want. And so basically I interviewed, that was kind of an interview, even though I didn't realize it. And then I met with Topher, who was the first assistant who interviewed me. And I think that there were a couple other people that they were looking at, but they put me forward as the number one choice. And I had an interview with Chuck, which he rescheduled multiple times, like, 10 minutes before. I'm like driving to the interview and they're like, hey, sorry, Chuck needs to reschedule. And I'm just like, fuck. It was like I wanted this job so badly and I would have done anything to get it. And so I finally sit down for this interview with Chuck, normal interview stuff, and it's going well. And he says, so Nick, if you're my assistant, every day when you wake up, if the first thing that you think about is Chuck Roven, and before you go to bed at night, the last thing that you think about is Chuck Roven, then you're probably doing your job right. But if the first thing that I think of when I wake up is Nick Boak, and the last thing that I think of before I go to bed is Nick Boak, you're probably going to be fired. And
That's great.
it couldn't be more true. I mean, as like an assistant for a guy like that, it's like you have to just live and breathe his life and like make everything happen and not, just be invisible while also being present and all those things. So he gave me this speech and he was like, all right, well, how about we start in 2 weeks? It's like, well, you got to give 2 weeks notice at your job. And I was like, yeah, that's right. He's like, all right, 2 weeks. And so I was fucking over the moon. I was so fucking excited. I called everyone I knew.
And did having that internship and asking him that question, did he remember it at all? Did that
Oh
play?
yeah. Sorry, I brought that up because he brought it up in our interview. So Chuck was like, I remember you. You interned for us, huh? Is like I remember you from the intern lunch, and I like remember reminded him of the story and the question that I asked and what his answer was. He was like, I remember that. That's really cool.
It's so helpful. Like those internships, you can like if you find that's one thing that I definitely found as well was like if you can find a way to ask perceptive questions, you know, like not just to ask the question, but like if it's genuinely something you want to know, and you put some thought into actually like framing a question in a way where like this person's going to actually have to answer with some consideration, and it becomes a memorable moment, you know.
100%. And like, and this is also just like a general piece of important advice is that, be genuine. Like that was something that I was like, what do I really want to know? If I'm going to be a producer and I want to hear some advice from a producer that I really look up to, what the fuck do I want to know? And, you know, I think that authenticity speaks volumes for people, especially
Especially in
someone,
Hollywood where
especially
it's
someone, yeah,
so.
especially exactly, especially in Hollywood where there's a lot of bullshit, and especially for someone like Chuck who just deals with a lot of bullshit every day, So like seeing someone who can cut through that bullshit and you know really talk it out is appreciated.
So you get to Atlas, you're the second assistant. How long are you there in total?
I was at Atlas for 2 years. I was the second assistant for 1 year and then got promoted to first assistant. And while I was there, it was really exciting. I was, the first movie I was credited on was American Hustle, with directed by David O. Russell, which was just, Christian Bale, Bradley Cooper, Jennifer Lawrence. It was just such like a big Hollywood movie that, I was just like, this is awesome to be working on this. It was nominated for a bunch of Oscars.
Great
Uh,
movie.
Great, really fun movie. It was like David O. Russell's homage to Scorsese, basically. And I loved it. But simultaneously, Chuck had just finished, they were just finishing post on Man of Steel, which was kind of like the launch of this new DC Comics universe. And so I worked on that. I worked on Batman versus Superman. I didn't work on, but I was there at the beginning of the development of all that stuff, like Suicide Squad, Aquaman, all that shit. And so it was just such an incredibly valuable experience. First of all, seeing how a $275 million movie like Batman versus Superman is produced, but also just seeing how this studio was constructing a universe, an IP universe from the ground up. Um,
What would you say are the biggest things you learned that you still use like in this part of your career that you picked up at Atlas? Whether you learned it from Atlas and Roven or just like that you witnessed like from other projects during that time period.
yeah. So I think that that I wish that I had known at the time was that, running Chuck's life and being his assistant was so complicated. I mean, he's got a private jet, he's flying from place to place. There are so many moving parts keeping this man's life moving forward that sometimes it was hard not to get like jaded and be like, what is this teaching me about being a producer?
Mm.
I wish that I had recognized at the time, like how valuable that experience was. And like just knowing how to run this man's life taught me so much about running my own life, first of all, but also how to run a set, how to run a production. And I can't tell you how many times I've found myself in a moment in my career where I think, like, what would Chuck do? How would he handle this situation? And it's been immensely helpful. Just the attention to detail as a producer is just so important. Planning for the worst so that you don't have to worry about it, so that you're not putting out fires. It can be a shitty like state of mind to like always be worrying about the worst thing, but when you get to sit back on set and see everything happen smoothly because you planned it perfectly, 100% worth it.
And when you say attention to detail, like what's an example? Like how detailed like is this guy getting in terms of what he's paying attention to?
Oh God. All right. So well, so as Chuck's assistant, he has this thing called the night sheet where you basically lay out the next 2 weeks of his life in extreme detail. So it's like he has a meeting at some place, put the address. If there are directions that like a GPS isn't going to be able to handle, like once you get to the property, you got to put all that in, like just one time there weren't explicit enough instructions for him, and he said, next time I need you to pretend that I'm 6 years old and I need you to hold my hand every step of the way to get me to the meeting. Okay. And so that was like the level of intensity of this night sheet and the level of information, because he's going so fast that he doesn't have time to like, he's got two assistants working for him full time. So in his mind, it's like, I don't have time to like try to figure this stuff out. I need to keep moving forward. So you need to give me these details. And so while the details that I was planning working for him were for one man's personal life, I've applied that to producing, where it's like, all right, now I'm walking through this day of shooting and I'm getting us from point A to B to C all the way to Z. What are all the things in the middle that are going to make us lose time, trip us up and just make the day less than seamless? And so it's that mentality and that mindset that I think has allowed, especially in the early stages of my career, where I literally had to do like so many people's jobs in one. It was just like that attention to detail and just a tenacious like pursuit of seamlessness that allowed things to go smoothly on a low budget with little support.
So basically, when you're Chuck Roven's assistant, you're helping him produce his life, basically.
Correct. Yeah, I am his life producer, and you're working with everybody in his office, all the other producers, all the junior executives. He had two full-time accountants. He had a woman that was, did things like parked his car at the airport so that it was there when his jet landed. She took out his dry cleaning, got the car wash, took it in for repairs, like a true personal assistant. Um, just managing all of these people in his life. It's kind of like if those are the department heads of the various aspects of his life and his other projects, I was the producer of that show.
That's it's fascinating because I've never thought of it in that context, and it's actually like that helps give a lot of context for what you can learn working for a producer. It's like if this is how they approach producing their life, if they're good at it, you could probably apply those same principles to producing any other type of project.
Correct. And also, in addition to what I learned producing his life, I was on I mean, some calls you had to jump off or he did them on his cell, but I was on very high level, important calls with, you know, studio heads, people like Ari Emanuel and Patrick Whitesell, just like the biggest players in the game, seeing how the biggest deals and movements in the game happen. So that was
Well,
obviously extremely
and
valuable.
And what surprised you being on calls like that? Because I got to imagine the reality of how those calls go is different from like before you've ever listened to a call like that, what you imagine they sound like.
I mean, sometimes it's pretty stereotypical. It's like feels like it's out of a Hollywood movie. I don't know. It's cool because I'm trying to think of like a specific example that is like colorful and exciting.
Or even if it's not colorful and exciting, just insightful, because I feel like those are the people like that level that doesn't get, there's no level beyond that in terms of Hollywood deal making, in terms of global entertainment. Like those are the highest level power brokers in the world. Were they doing business in the same way that producers at a different level are doing business, or is there anything that distinguishes it?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think that there's like a supreme level of confidence, when you're dealing with people at that level. Um, and there's like a camaraderie too. Like, I don't know. I remember so Chuck was like extremely big on confidentiality and secrecy and watermarked scripts and not sending anything digitally. Like I would go deliver a paper script with a watermark on it and have to sit there while someone reads it, like crazy shit
Just
like that.
just for the Christopher Nolan projects or for all the Atlas projects?
Literally everything. Like like I mean, there was a project that never got anywhere that was like a it was like a sci-fi project that we were trying to get Jennifer Lawrence attached to. And I literally went and sat at CAA while her agent like read the script. And it was like kind of embarrassing, but also like kind of cool. And so, you know, like one time Chuck was giving a script to Patrick Weitzel, and Patrick was like, Chuck, like, come on, like, how much business have we done together? Like, you can trust me. And Chuck was like, all right, Patrick, like, I'm going to make an exception this one time, because other than making you rich, your comfort is my number one priority. It's just like funny shit like that, you know, like they just kind of talk shit and have fun because they're, you know, they're at the top of the game and they are making big things happen. And, you know, it's
Nick,
really cool.
is part of that also because you know, so much of Hollywood's the entertainment business, you know, like what I think differentiates it from a lot of other industries is that a lot of the time it's like a lot of smoke and mirrors in terms of you're trying to make something that doesn't necessarily have any inherent value appear to be valuable. So it's not like real estate where you're selling a building that already generates cash flow and, you know, like even if there's an economic downturn, even if you can't redevelop it, like there's inherent value already inside of it. But like is this stuff kind of stunts like that where it's like, okay, you have 3 hours, you have a 3 hour window and my assistant's gonna wait outside the door. Does that not create more of a perceived like value around the project? Is that like a tactic in a way?
100%. I think that there is a mystique, and you know, at the time Chuck was coming off of The Dark Knight, and you know, The Dark Knight Rises actually was when, you know, had been released shortly before I started working for him. And uh he had a mystique about him. It was like when I would go deliver these scripts to these agents, they would be like, what's it like working for that guy? Like, are you good? Like, you know? And so I don't know. I mean, part of it is that Chuck is like that intense. But there is like a little bit of stagecraft, I would say, in, you know, the inner workings of Hollywood.
So, that stuff fascinates me, man. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
So you're getting to listen to how business is done at the very highest level that exists in Hollywood. You put in a couple years there. You're living the glamorous life of a Hollywood assistant. How glamorous is that life?
I would say it's not glamorous at all, dude. I mean, that's hilarious because that's the perception. And you know, like I will say it was a job that was enviable. Like many people would love to have that job, but it sucked. It was like, you know, 12 hours a day for sure. As the second assistant, you're in at 8 and you are rolling calls at 8 and you leave at 8, you know, at least. And, you know, there were times where like at the end of the day, you're going to Chuck's house and you're like helping him bring shit into the house, and you're, you know, like one time, I remember one time I was in the kitchen with him at like 11 p.m. and he's like, his wife calls. He's like, Steph, give me a second. Like I'm here with Nick. Like I gotta send him home. You know, it's just like, it's intense, and it's nonstop. You're getting calls. You know, if he's in China, you're getting a call at 3 in the morning, having to handle something. Um, you know, like weekends, he has like he has his private email and his public email, and like I'm monitoring the public email and like forwarding him shit that's important. It's like just such a gnarly job.
But at
um
least you're getting paid really well, right?
no. No. Oh my god, I
But
don't know
paint the
what.
picture because like I think there is that misconception that like, well, you're in Hollywood, you're living the life, like, but people don't really realize how much of a struggle it actually is just to survive, like how unsustainable in a way that lifestyle is. So like how are you actually living on, like what kind of salary are you getting at that stage? How are you living and getting
Oh
through
my,
that?
I mean, you know, it was pretty pitiful. Luckily, you don't have much of a social life, so you know, you're just working all the time. So,
You have
but
no
like
time for the social life,
you
right?
have no time to like spend what little money you're getting. But yeah, no, I was not making very much money. I mean, even working for Chuck, or you know, later working for John Lesher, it was like you're making like basically what like a PA makes on set, you know, but like as a consistent salary.
It's basically minimum wage ultimately, like when
I
you
would say
average it out.
it probably calculates to less than minimum wage considering where you're at, but and I think that things are changing. I think that overall the industry is becoming more like legit in terms of how people are treated. But, you know, I think that the Harvey Weinstein and the Time's Up and Me Too, everything has like changed the way that people are treated on in a personal level. But I think that in terms of like the way that HR works and the way that, you know, people are compensated is getting better. So, you know, we're talking, well, when was I working for Chuck? It was 2013 and 2014. So it's like 10 years ago at this point. So, you know, I was not making good money at all, but I was happy to be there. It was like I felt lucky to be there even.
But I think
And
it's relevant to know that, because like that's really, if you want to work in the industry, because I feel like entertainment's bifurcated now between like user generated content, digital media, people who self-publish to like YouTube, for example,
yeah,
or TikTok, Instagram, and then the actual entertainment industry itself, the system of Hollywood. And this is like the reality of, if you want to build those types of relationships and see how those companies operate, like you're working 12+ hour days, you know, you're making on a, like if you're really looking at the hours, you're probably making below minimum wage. You have no life outside of it, and like that's the path that you're committing to build those first steps of your career.
yes, correct. And again, back to my earlier point, I don't think that if I loved it so I think a lot of people get into Hollywood because they think it's sick, you know, they think it's like really cool. I'm gonna be in the movie business, I'm gonna meet celebrities, I'm gonna go to all the cool parties. But if that's what you're showing up for, you're gonna have a hard time, you know, like I mean, maybe not. Maybe you are care about that much. But if that is just something that doesn't matter to me, the fact that you get to tell stories and see it come alive on screen is what kept me going through the whole thing.
So at what point, so you're at Atlas for a couple years, then you go to start working for John Lesher. At
Mhm.
what point does the world of documentary start to beckon?
That's an interesting question. I think that basically I kind of just started watching them on my own time. Actually, you know what? John Lesher, when I first started working for him, he was like, "You got to check out this doc, Cartel Land." And it's insane. And I watched it and I was like, this is insane. This movie is so good. It's so crazy. Um, and that comes to mind, but I had, you know, Netflix and the streamers had just been putting out more and more documentaries. I think it was the beginning of this moment that we're in right now where docs were taking off and becoming more popular, but having higher budgets and better production value. And I think that something that I have observed and I think was happening was that with Netflix and with all of this content available to everyone, people's tastes were diversifying. You know, you could seek out different things. You weren't being told what you needed to watch by the studio. And therefore, somehow documentary became interesting because I think that interesting to people because I think that in addition to being entertained, people also like being educated and learning about real life stuff and, you know, learning a story that you can talk about with your friends at the dinner table that happened in real life and how crazy is that.
I think to that point, you know, one of the fascinating things from a psychological standpoint about how entertainment works is the concept of cognitive dissonance. You know,
Hmm,
when you watch a movie, you know that you're watching something that's not real,
correct.
but you're kind of tricking yourself to be invested emotionally in the stakes of the story, in the outcome. Like if you don't care about it at all, it's not going to be an entertaining experience. So like you
Right.
have to, we're very adept at subconsciously like creating that dissonance and understanding, okay, well, this isn't real, but I'm still going to enjoy it. You know, I'm still going to go along for the ride. Like in horror movies, if you thought that was real, it would be so like obviously you wouldn't be enjoying it, but you're able to enjoy it because of cognitive dissonance. I think that's why documentary has such a unique appeal, and why when there is like a Tiger King story that is, it's like a movie script, you know, but it played out in real life, it's such a phenomenon because you do less work on there's less cognitive dissonance because you know it's real.
Correct. Well, that goes back to my earlier point about the craft of filmmaking. And as a filmmaker, the more you can lessen that cognitive dissonance, like or the more that you can get people on board and bring them into the world through the craft and through the filmmaking, that is, that's the art right there. It's like, we know that this is fake, but I'm bawling my eyes out because I'm watching something tragic happen to this person because I'm so invested and connected. And so with documentary, we don't have the same resources financially to create that craft. Um, but when I met my partner and my director, Andrew Renzi, he had this mandate of wanting to strive to elevate the craft as much as possible, aesthetically and visually, to create the same feel and the same experience as a feature film within the world of a documentary. And so I had been really interested in documentaries. I've been watching them. And, I've been working for Lesher for about 2 years.
And just give us the bridge from Atlas to Lesher really quick, like in a summary.
Well, basically, I'd been with Chuck for 2 years and he wasn't ready to promote me. I had my end of year meeting with him where he was like, well, listen, like I don't really have room to promote you at the company, but like, let's see how it goes. And I was like, well, Chuck, I don't know how much longer I can stick this out. And he was like, well, then maybe we should help you find your next thing. And
That
I
must have been
ended
tough.
Yeah, that was tough. It was tough hearing that like I'd fucking worked my ass off for 2 years and that there wasn't really a place for me to move up at the company. And that, if I kept sticking it out, we could see, but maybe we should, figure out your next thing.
With
And
hindsight, do you see like there really wasn't like an opening there? So for him as a he knows he has a useful like asset in you, but he doesn't have another way to utilize you outside of that. So he's just kind of like quickly moved on to, well, then let's see what your next
so
step would look like.
I was crushed. I was like, this was my future. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is where I'm supposed to go. I was going to do this. And like, I loved everyone at the company too. I had great relationships. And I was so bummed. But in hindsight, it was like the best thing that ever happened to me. I don't know that I would have thrived if I stayed there. And, I wouldn't be where I am today. And like, I love the path that I'm on. So, I think that it was the best thing that ever happened. And leaving Atlas and moving on from working for Chuck, I got to work for John Lesher, who is like another huge producer. He had just won the Oscar for producing Birdman and is also just like a totally different style of producer. Chuck is like, as I mentioned, he's like in the details, he's granular, he is like nuts and bolts, like in the production budgets. Like he's the guy that the studio goes to because they know that he'll manage this $200+ million budget effectively and efficiently. John is much more about relationships and he has incredible taste in stories and filmmakers and all of that. And yeah, it's much more about like building the relationships and finding the right stories. And um his relationships with filmmakers are incredible. He was a talent agent and he uh helped build the careers of people like David O. Russell and Alfonso Cuarón and just like the list goes on. Paul Thomas Anderson, like
Oh wow.
the list is insane. And then he went on to be a studio executive and then a producer. And so just in terms of the difference in perspective of these two producers, it could not be more different. And the style was just so different. So it was such a valuable experience jumping from Chuck to Lesher. And also with Lesher, I got to be a little more hands-on. Like his business is a little smaller. He's more like one project at a time. And so I got to like be on set for 3 months for a Christian Bale movie called Hostels and really be in the weeds with him in a way that I wasn't with Chuck. Again, John was also a complicated guy and a difficult person to work for, but uh,
They all are, right?
they all are, and I have great relationships with both of them to this day. So anyway, I'm coming on 2 years working with John, and I'm like, I think I'm at that moment that I think everybody in this business reaches, where at some point, at least once, where you're like, fuck, I don't know if I have it in me to keep doing this. I don't know if I'm right for this business, if this business is right for me. I don't know if I have what it takes. I don't know if I'm going to get there. And I put in all this time, and like, how fucked up would that be for me to quit right now? But I don't know. I just don't know. And I was like, what would I do? Do I go to business school and just like try to figure it out? Like, what do I do? Because I still love this. I love films and I love this. And the thing that the thing that I thought that kept me going was like, if 5 years from now, if you every time you turn on Netflix and you don't have something up there, you're gonna want to kill yourself. You're just gonna be so disappointed that you gave up and didn't get yourself there. So it was literally right around this moment that I met Andrew Renzi, my business partner and my director, the primary director I work with. And he had put together a little bit of money, wanted to start a production company, and needed someone that had great experience and knew how the business worked, but also like wasn't so experienced that he would cost a fortune. And so I kind of fit that bill pretty perfectly. I met him just taking like a director meeting. My friend Mike Lay from USC was like my producer on this doc that I'm doing. He's building a company. He wants someone like you. And I was like, well, I'll meet him. It's always good to meet a director, but like, I don't know if I'm going to like take that job. But we
And
ended up,
and did he want to build a documentary focused production company? Did you know that at the time?
he wanted to do a little bit of everything, but the primary focus would be documentaries. As a director, he wanted to make his focus documentaries. And so
And was that at that time? I know you had mentioned Cartel Land started to open the door of you looking at the medium differently. Was that you were open to that idea of a documentary focused production company even at that time?
yeah, I think that, I mean, basically when he pitched it to me, the idea to me, it was basically like I'd get a little bit of a salary to help him build a company together, and with the focus in documentaries. And I just felt I had this feeling that as a young producer, with the sort of with like the connections and the know-how that I did have, that it would be easier for me to break into documentary on a high level than to go do an independent feature film that I'd put together. I'd try to put together a few $1,000,000 and try to get a movie star attached and try to get it into a festival and try and sell it and try and make a splash, like basically get in line with everyone else that's trying to do that. I saw an opportunity in documentary because it was kind of starting to grow and it was like becoming more and more exciting. And
Like
and I
there
was
was growth in that sector of entertainment. Like you saw documentary disproportionately growing faster than independent film or TV or whatever it was.
yeah, that's how I felt at the time, was that I was like, things seem to be happening here. And I can't put my finger on any sales that happened, but I also remember noting that like documentary sale, like there had been a few like, whoa, $5 million, $10 million documentary sale. That's nuts. So it seemed to me, and also this vision that Renzi had about like elevating the craft and trying to, use a better camera package and better lensing and create real cinematic moments out of it, as opposed to like the kind of more traditional talking heads informational documentary, like not to knock on Ken Burns, he's a fucking genius and pioneer of our medium, but like the Ken Burns like standard like survey documentary, something totally different from that.
And let me just tell you, man, I've loved like everything you guys have done, but I do feel like Pepsi Where's My Jet hit a different level of really feeling like you're like, am I watching a movie or am I watching a documentary? Because the recreation sequences are film, like those are film moments and film scenes, and they blend. I was surprised at how well they blended in to the rest of the documentary. Like it's seamless.
Thank you. That means a lot to hear that. And I'm super proud of the recreations, because basically it was me, my line producer, a production manager, and like a coordinator that and like put the whole thing together. And I think that there was a really great vibe. Everybody was so on board with the project, and we made just a lot happen with, I mean, not a small amount of money, but with compared to like a feature film, we just didn't have the resources, but everybody was so on board with the vision that we really were able to squeeze a lot out of a little bit of money, and it turned out really great, and I'm really proud of it.
Well, I'm definitely gonna want to know more about how you did that. But before we get to that, I want to know you sit down with Renzi. He articulates this vision for more elevated cinematic storytelling and aesthetics in
Mm-hmm.
the documentary format, and you decide to team up with him. What are those? How do you guys launch the company, and what do you see as like the milestones early on in turning it from an idea into a successful production company?
Well, let's see. I mean, I'll say this, the dream that and then the vision that Renzi pitched me was a lot more exciting and seamless than the reality of it. If I had known how difficult the first year was going to be without knowing where we'd end up, I never would have done it. But that being said, you know, we worked our asses off and we fucking got there. So basically the first big step was our first feature together was called They Fight. And we took a little bit of the company money to go shoot a teaser or a sizzle reel.
How did you guys find the IP?
It came to us as an article. It was an article written in the Washington Post about a gym in Washington, D.C. that it was in like a pretty underprivileged, low income neighborhood, and the head coach was a convicted felon and a former drug addict. And the idea was that Coach Walt was better equipped than anybody to tell these kids like that they need to stay off the street and stay in the gym because he'd been through it all. And so we just heard this story, thought it was amazing.
And they were also defending their or going for national championships or something, right?
Correct. Yeah. So these two young boxers were multiple time national championships for their age bracket. So clearly Walt was a good coach. He knows what he's doing, and he's not only keeping these kids in a good structured program, but they're excelling. And so this was just such a cool, incredible story that was brought to us by a writer named Mike Minahan, who wrote this for the Washington Post, and now he's actually a producer that's kind of in our fold of our company, North of Now. And as I said, we spent a little bit of money to go shoot a teaser, and basically patched it together from there. Used that. The teaser was incredible. And when I saw this teaser, I was just like, oh my God, this is what we're doing. Like, there were little, as hard as it was, having like no money, no resources. Also, like, it felt immediately like all of the doors that had been opened to me as an assistant for high level producers were not shut, but like not as available. People were like, oh, that's so great. You're off on your own. Like, give me a call when you matter, like when you've actually done something. It's hard for people to go out on a limb for you when you don't have a proven resume of your own. They're helpful in getting you in the door and helping, but I would say that it felt a little bit like, oh God, I'm really out on my own now. Which was tough, but there were little milestones like this that gave me the confidence to know we had something special going.
And really quickly, so when you set out to make that, you set out to do a proof of concept effectively, right?
Yeah.
So the goal was, we're going to use some of our own equity, some probably, I would guess somewhere between $5,000 and $30,000, I would guess.
Yeah.
To go and make a short documentary that is to be used almost as a marketing tool, to go and fundraise your budget for a feature documentary.
Correct. Yes, exactly. A proof of concept, as you say. And this one that we made for They Fight was very, very much like it felt like a teaser or like a trailer for the movie that we were going to make. It was moody. It was like beautifully shot. And again, this is where I saw Renzi's vision come to life. We shot this documentary on the Alexa Mini with Hawk anamorphic lenses, and so it just had this like amazing look to it. And we got like a really great DP from New York named Sean Peters involved.
And let me just also say, like, just even off that, you're just the choice of anamorphic lenses, like for people that don't think a lot about documentary and how they're shot, like you're already fundamentally making a choice in how it's going to look and feel that is leans more cinematic, like filmic, than it does documentary. Documentary typically you're on spherical lenses, which just look normal. Anamorphic has more of a distorted look, but it feels nice, like it feels like a movie. But it's harder to shoot with those. They're typically not as fast, so like they're a little bit darker. You need more light. They're heavier, they're more burdensome, they're more expensive. So like that's you really see how his vision for let's make this feel like a movie, even down to the choice of tool. He
Mhm.
articulated that.
Yep, and we used like we got a steady cam operator for a few days, just like watching the kids train in the gym. It was really it was just a totally different approach, and that is the thing that I love about working with filmmakers and with amazing DPs, is that like as a producer you kind of have an idea of how things are going to go, and then when you get your department head in there and see how they execute it, it's like, well, that's not how I would have done it, but that is way better. And I love it. Um, so yeah, so basically we used this teaser to get our financing. We got Common involved as a producer, which really was helpful. He had just won an Academy Award.
How do you do that? How do you get somebody like that on board?
That was through CAA. Basically, one of my good friends, Matt Nordston, who I think uh, was he was at CAA at the time, and I showed him the sizzle, and he was like, "Oh my God, like let me, we just had a staff meeting, and Common is looking for stuff like this," and he just got it in front of them, and they wanted to do it. It was pretty seamless. It was just a series of emails and phone calls, and then he was attached as a producer. And I would say that, as you know, uh, in the early stages of our documentary career, having a celebrity EP on your project is extremely helpful in terms of getting financing and getting visibility. Basically, getting that sign off from a celebrity uh, just has a lot of value.
And the way that I look at it, and tell me if you look at it any differently, is that like I was so naive when I first started that I would have thought, oh, so Common put money into your movie, so he helped finance your movie. Well, of course, that's not the case. Somebody like that's never going to put their own, typically isn't going to put their own money into it. And I would think in this case he didn't. But the value is like all of a sudden there's a headline that you could read in an editorial like Deadline or Hollywood Reporter or the Washington Post or whatever, because now it's newsworthy because this person's involved. So like the branding association that you get from having this person's name on the project all of a sudden turns what might not be really a newsworthy event or story into something that people can talk about. And then it's all of a sudden it's like elevated, it's differentiated from the other projects that you might be competing with.
Correct, exactly. Because someone like that, it's like they're only willing to put their name on so many things and put their time into so many things. So, it just gives you that credibility.
Right. Right. And so what does that project end up doing?
Basically, we put together the money to finish shooting it. We finished editorial, and we sold it to Fox Sports. Gabe Spitzer, who's now at Netflix, was our executive at the time, and he uh, he loved the movie and he bought it, and we put it out there in the world.
How did it get in front of how did it get in front of the buyers at Fox Sports?
I'm trying to think how we got that one. I think it was through the agency, to be honest with you.
Because Renzi was represented at the time, or
Yeah.
I'm sure he still is.
Yeah, Renzi was represented at WME. I think that Kevin Iwashina, it's hard for me to remember they fight. Let's use Ready for War as more of the case study for those kinds of
Okay,
things.
cool.
And yeah.
All right, well then how do we get to Ready for War from They Fight?
All right, so They Fight comes out. They Fight is moderately successful, at least like critically, and like I think that we made a bit of a name for ourselves in terms of like the way that we told that story visually and in terms of the narrative. So we're in post on They Fight. and I hear about this story of deported US veterans. So, green card holding immigrant soldiers who sign up for the military, serve, and come home to America, get in a little bit of trouble, and serve time and are deported. Most of them go to Mexico because they're Mexican born. And unfortunately, like the worst case scenario of this situation and this scenario is that they are recruited forcefully by Mexican drug cartels because they are trained soldiers and basically know how to kill people, which is a skill that is very useful as a sicario or a hitman in Mexico. Um,
And if they are green card holders, why are they deported?
So basically, if you're a green card soldier, you have the right to sign up for citizenship, but it's a bit of a process, and just some of these guys just don't get through. These guys and women actually, um, they just don't get through the process. A lot of them will say, I was busy fighting a war. I just didn't get around to it. And then a lot of them come home with PTSD, as most soldiers do. A lot of them get into drugs, alcohol, depressive, self-destructive behavior, get into some trouble, and get themselves deported. Um, and so, I heard this story, and at the time, immigration was just like, build the wall, like all of this stuff was going on. And while it's very hard to like say, I want to go make a documentary about immigration and just pick a big issue and make a doc about it, we saw this as like a really exciting and interesting entry point into a much bigger conversation. We're not making the immigration documentary, but we are making the doc about deported immigrant veterans.
When you first told me about this project, and particularly the story of a veteran who was deported and then was picked up once he was deported to Mexico, was then picked up and forced to be a sicario, an assassin for a Mexican cartel, because he had that skill set, and they're like, hey, listen, we already know you have this skill set, this is what you're going to do for us, you don't have a choice. And then you were like, yeah, and we're with him, like embedded with him, and we have that footage. I was like, holy shit, dude, this is, I mean, it's literally sounds like a movie, but it's that access, I think, is, I bring this up because I'm curious to know from your perspective as a producer, like, what are the criteria that you're going through in your head when you're evaluating a story idea to decide if it's worth pursuing as a project and putting your time and your resources into? And I would have to think access is pretty close to the top of that list.
Access is definitely top of the list, but to be honest, like Ready for War, we didn't really have any access. We got access. Sorry, I'll take a step back. So yes, access is 100% a huge thing. I think that a lot of times when I hear a story, it just clicks. There's something about it where it has that X factor that you're like, wow, this is worth exploring and worth pursuing. And
But
then
what is it? What is that? What is that?
I think for me, it's like it's an issue or a topic that I'm excited about, but there's some sort of crazy entry point into it. Um, there's something that draws you in that is totally separate from that topic, but then you stay there to learn about that topic. So we call it like the Trojan horse. Like it has to have the Trojan horse into the bigger issue. So for Ready for War, the bigger issue was immigration, and the Trojan horse was drug cartels. And so you have this story where, and also American veterans and the way that we treat our veterans and what happens to them when they come home, something that we all care about and we're all concerned about, but probably don't know enough about. And we used the drug cartels and the American veteran conversation as a way to explore the immigration conversation. And so it was really interesting because I know some pretty conservative people that, are not necessarily, don't necessarily have friendly viewpoints when it comes to immigration. But even when I spoke to some of those folks about this, you could see the gears turning in their head, and they would say, wait, so you're telling me that they're veterans and that they served and they're getting deported? Well, that's fucked up, So for that reason, that's how I knew that it was a really exciting opportunity, because you are, most people, when you bring up deportation, and most people on that side of things, when you bring up deportation and immigration, they kind of like freeze up and immediately just like have their planned scripted answers of how they feel about it. But this was something that I felt like could provoke nuance in a bigger conversation.
And and I'm glad you bring that up because I thought you guys handled that really delicately and really well. How did you go about striking like an apolitical? Because I do feel like ultimately it's a humanistic storytelling. It's thematic. Like you're dealing with a political, socio-political issue of immigration, but I did feel like you stayed in a, like you didn't preach in terms of what should be done, and like you didn't condemn one perspective versus another. I felt like you were able to avoid doing that. Was that, how important was that to you, and how did you actually achieve that practically?
Well, I think that for one thing, we like took it pretty easy on the talking heads and the like giving viewpoints. Like we had Senator Tammy Duckworth, and we had this guy Nathan Fletcher, who's a San Diego politician who was very active in the movement. We had some people weighing in on sort of their political thoughts on it, but none of it was coming from a perspective of right versus left. It was like purely just about the way that we're treating our veterans, which is something that everybody can get behind. The
Right.
other huge component of that allowed us to stay away from making this like such a politically charged documentary is that most of the experience was a verite documentary experience where we were following three stories in real time. One is Hector, who was deported. He'd been deported for 14 years, trying to come home. Number two is Miguel, who is facing deportation, is about to be deported to Mexico after serving 8 years in prison for a drug trafficking sentence. And number three was Elvet, a sicario in Juarez, who'd been there for, I think, 10 years working as a hitman, uh, a hired killer. And so because we were following these three real stories in real time, most of the action is just watching it unfold. And first of all, that was just such an incredible experience. Not knowing how a story is going to end when you start it is a little anxiety inducing, but like when these big moments happen, it's just like the most amazing thing, from your Tatiana documentary, just like seeing someone's life unfold in real time. If it's a positive event, it's like the most uplifting feeling. If it's negative, it's just soul crushing watching something bad happen to somebody in real time.
But I think what you bring up that's so poignant is the fact that once you've already picked a theme and a world, and you're like, okay, well, we're going to Trojan horse a conversation about immigration through drug cartels. What you're really able to do is when you are telling verite stories that are active storylines, meaning you're tracking them as they are unfolding, you're just showing someone's life unfold, and people can come to their own conclusions about like what's good or bad or right or wrong about what's happening to them without you as the filmmaker needing to come to some determination about like the morality of it, which
Correct.
I found that to be incredibly effective.
Yeah, it's so true. And I'm kind of dying for the opportunity to have another one of these verite experiences. We were very lucky that our first two were such authentic, beautiful stories that happened in real time. The Curse of Von Dutch and Pepsi, Where's My Jet were both very retrospective, kind of like pop culture driven, archival documentaries. And what, as you said, I think what allowed us to set those apart was the recreations. But um, I'm really, really trying to find that next story where I get to like saddle up next to some real people as their real life is happening and see how it goes.
So that brings us back to something, and I totally cut you off, so that was my fault. But I asked you, what are the criteria that you look at to decide whether a story idea is worth pursuing? You mentioned the first thing that you mentioned was just the story idea itself, the concept. Is it something that just grabs you immediately? It either does or it doesn't. And then we also talked about access. Are there other criteria that are on your list?
It's hard for me to say. I think that I'm pretty open-minded in terms of the genre the type of story, like I can't think of something that I'm like not interested in. It's just like at this point, first of all, the market is like so competitive that you kind of have to have that like hook and that X factor that's going to make it stand apart. Like you can't go pitch like we're going to do the formative immigration documentary or the formative like AI documentary or crypto documentary, you know. It has to have a component for the story that is just like unique and a point of access that is unique. Um and it's really hard for me to express like what that is, because it's kind of a thing where it's just like when I see it I feel it, you know.
Mm-hmm. And so you guys, saddle up for Ready for War. Did you put it together similarly? Did you make a proof of concept and then get it financed? How did you actually get that project made and sold?
Oh man, yeah, so that was so when I say that if I had known how hard the beginning of building North of Now would be, and without knowing where it went, this is one of those moments. Basically we were tapped out. We had no money left and in our company, and Ready for War was in post, but we hadn't quite, either we had sold it and we were negotiating the offer, but the money wasn't there yet. And so I actually put my own credit card down. I like believed in this story so fucking much that I was like, we need to go shoot this right now. And so I put about 30 grand on my personal credit card, and we went for it. And like within 2 months, we had financing locked in place, and I got paid back, and it all worked out. But it was a very risky and dumb move. I wouldn't necessarily advise anyone to do it, but you know, I guess if you believe in it enough, go for it.
You were sleeping well for sure.
Yeah. Oh man, that was crazy. Was, yeah. So we put the money on the credit card. We got a camera package. We got a small crew down to Tijuana and Juarez for a week, and cut something together. And then from there we got uh, Pretty Bird or Ventureland involved with Kirsten Emhoff as our initial financier. I mean, she financed most of the documentary. Then eventually we got David Ayer involved as an executive producer because he's a veteran and he's also really into the world of drug cartels and crime and Mexico. He lived in Mexico for a while, and basically he got his hands on the materials also through CAA, through my friend Matt Nordston. And uh, they came on board and we pitched it around. We got it in front of Showtime. They loved it, and they bought it.
And they bought it when it was done, or at what stage did they buy it?
They bought it. No, we were not done. We had shot most of it, but we were not very far into the edit. We had basically been editing as we went, here and there. And we had basically sequences of the film built out, but there was no real continuity. There was no like full narrative in place. So we basically cut together another one of these sales reel teasers and showed them that, and then gave them the pitch for what it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So Showtime bought it. We also got it into, shortly after Showtime bought it, we got it into the Toronto Film Festival,
Mm-hmm.
which was a huge win. That was my first film festival acceptance. And
Pretty good.
yeah, yeah, I was
Pretty
very
good.
Showtime and TIFF was a big one. We also got Drake involved. We have our editor was our initial entry point. He introduced us to Drake's camp because Ben Wolin, our editor, does their stage visuals for Drake's shows, and now we're all really good friends, and we're working on multiple things together. But so they heard about this story and they were like, Drake would love this. Like, let's get this in front of him. And Drake got attached as an EP and was, again, very helpful in terms of having that celebrity EP sign off, just for the marketing and publicity and overall branding of the project.
And was that before or after you guys sold it to Showtime?
Uh, that was before, actually.
Yeah.
So
I
Drake
would have
and
to
Dave.
think that's like that moves the needle for a buyer like Showtime.
Definitely, definitely. And they were, you know, what was cool about both Drake and Dream Crew, his company, and the producers involved, and David Ayer and his company, Cedar Park, is that they were all just only supportive, I would say. Like nobody really had an agenda creatively, at least. They really gave us our own, you know, space to shape the film. And in fact, it's funny because we showed them the first cut of the movie, and this cut was like so bloated, like it was not good. Like I'll tell you, it was just not a good cut.
It was a fat cut, you know, you hadn't gone in and shaped it yet.
Yeah, and we basically we just got excited and we were like, you know, the team's all together,
Yeah, yeah.
Showtime, like everyone's here, and we like cut this thing, and it was so bloated, and like we got everyone together in this movie theater at WME to watch it, and everyone was like, yeah, it looks like it's coming along really well. It was so bad, but you know, despite even that, everyone like could see the vision and knew that we knew what we were doing and knew that we knew how to shape the diamond in this rough.
Hey, but isn't that interesting though, that you do have to be strategic with when you show people what, like
Yes.
particularly like if you have, because there are different layers of partners that you have your like internal, like very close, like creative partners. Obviously Renzi as the director is like driving the creative conversation. You have your editor, you have yourself, like you and Renzi are creative partners in every way. So like the
Yeah.
three of you, I'm sure, are like the core team building it out. But then you have, let's say, creative partners like a David Ayer or someone who works for him, or your you know, Ventureland, and they'll probably see something sooner. But then, you know, when is Showtime? You only want Showtime to see something that they're like, oh shit, we're really gonna get behind this and market the fuck out of this, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, I think we probably showed it to them a little early. We kind of like were like, let's set a date and then let's show it to them instead of kind of having them give us the mandate. Um, so I think that was a little bit of inexperience and, you know, eagerness, but I've also experienced the other side of things where we show it to them too late. Like we've done too many internal cuts, and then by the time we show it to the network, like of course they're going to have a bunch of notes, and it's like,
Right.
well, we maybe shouldn't have been so precious and spent so much time trying to get excited about it to what we present, because no matter what, they're going to tear it apart and tear it down. So it's like, let's save a little bit of our like creative bandwidth and excitement and energy for when we get to the network, you know?
Do you feel like, because there, and I've experienced the same thing, you know, in different types of projects, whether it's scripts for a film, you know, television pilot I developed at Netflix, like they're always going to have feedback, you know. Sometimes it's feedback that you're like, okay, you know, like that's useful, you have fresh eyes, you know, so you can maybe see things with objectivity that we don't have anymore. But I can't help but shake the feeling that like there's also that element that if you give someone an opportunity to give notes, they're going to look for things to give notes on.
Yeah.
How do you navigate the notes process, knowing that like they're your partners and they're investing, so like they should have a say and you want them to be excited, you want them to be invested, but then the reality that sometimes notes aren't good notes, and
Yeah.
sometimes those notes come from the place of like, I know I have to give a note to justify my salary and like my role at this company. Like, why am I here if I'm not even giving any notes? You know, how do you navigate the notes process?
That's a great question, and it's a complicated question because you know, sometimes the network does give really good notes, you know, like so on Pepsi Where's My Jet, Netflix gave some really great notes. Like they know their platform and they know their viewers much better than we do, because they have so much data to back it up. And so sometimes that can be very frustrating because it feels like they are telling you to make something other than what you initially set out to do. But sometimes they're right. And so you have to find that balance of like seeing the network's perspective and and figuring out what really makes sense for to help the project. You like as a producer, like the thing that I always try to say is like, what is best for this project? You know, let's try to put our egos aside. Let's try to put aside our precious opinions and preconceived notions about where we thought that this project was going, and what is going to be best for this project. And so you have to, like, with every note that the network gives or your producing partners give, it's like, is this going to be best for the project? And if the answer is no, then you have to figure out how to push back on it and how to say, respectfully, like, I think that this note is wrong, and here's why. I think that we're going to lose, the ebb and flow of the edit. It's going to throw off the rhythm if we move this piece up to the front or move it to the back or take it out completely. Like, we need this creatively so that the audience can understand this. You have to, obviously, if you're going to push back on a note, there needs to be a reason. You can't just like ignore it. I mean, you can, but they're gonna give the note again, and they're gonna say, as per our last round of notes, we'd like to see this change. So,
I've heard that one.
yeah. So
Dude, and they're so snarky about it too, because they're like, motherfucker, we already told you, man.
yeah, exactly. So
Can you give an example, Nick, of a note that, let's say, you got on Pepsi Where's My Jet, which must be stated, like, that movie hit the culture, man. Like, that movie hit the zeitgeist, and I knew it did, because I saw it on the top 10, and I was like, oh, on Netflix, and I was like, wow, okay, this is clearly getting traction. But then I knew, like, anecdotally, that it was because my sister asked me, hey, I just watched this amazing docu-series on Netflix. I think you'd really like it. It's called Pepsi Where's My Jet. And I was like, dude, my boy produced that. Like, it was cool to see people in my family even discovering it on their own. What was an example of a note that you got from Netflix that initially you were like, oh, like, I really don't want to do that, but ended up to the benefit of the project?
yeah, that's a good one. So in the show, there is this present day storyline of John and Todd in Antarctica climbing Mount Vincent. And our original idea was to start the show was to have a cold open where you're in Antarctica and you're on this little snow plane and there's a mountain, and it's super mysterious. It's almost like a Spielberg movie. It's like Indiana Jones. It's like, oh my gosh, they're in Antarctica. I thought I was watching the Pepsi doc. Why am I here in Antarctica? And it was kind of like, it was like a little, in retrospect, it was maybe like a little more meditative and like cinematic and like a little less energetic and propulsive of a way. And Netflix was kind of like, listen, we love this, it's beautiful, but like, people are showing up for the Pepsi doc. Let's start off strong with Pepsi, and like, we need to get these people on board and hooked in the first 10 minutes of this, otherwise we're going to lose them, because that's how impatient today's streaming viewer is. It's like, if you don't get them in the first 10 minutes, they're out, because there's too much other stuff for them to click on. So first of all, you have to get them to click on your tile and agree and get into it. So you have to pick the right title and have the right artwork, but also you've got to, get them in the first 10 minutes, otherwise they're gone.
Did they use that figure 10 minutes?
I don't know that they specifically said that, but basically, they were like, we've got to launch this thing,
Yeah.
and like the
Yeah.
mountaineering, people are into mountaineering content, with like Free Solo and The Alpinist and 14 Peaks and all that stuff. But like, this is not that project. It has that element in it, but let's give the people what this project is first.
Deliver on the promise.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so just going back a little bit. So you have this great success with Ready for War. Showtime, TIFF, the movie comes out. How does that propel you from feature documentaries to now working directly in partnership with Hulu on the Von Dutch series, which from what I understand was more driven by them approaching Renzi to direct, to then like a true North of Now project that is Pepsi Where's My Jet, that's homegrown, that you guys develop and produce in partnership with a streamer, with the studio, and that releases and hits the zeitgeist?
So Von Dutch, you're correct, Renzi was approached to direct it. He pitched and won the pitch and got awarded the job to direct it, and was able to bring me on as a producer. And this was, I mean, talk about a valuable learning experience. This was the first time that we had done something directly for the network, with a big production company, IPC, and just had like so much oversight compared to what we were used to. So in ways that was a little stressful, but we also did have the resources, like more money, first of all, and just more bodies involved to shape the thing. And so I would say that the biggest struggle was having the confidence to push back and like believe, trust in our creative process, because it felt a little bit like sometimes like we're coming in as the inexperienced guys, but then reminding ourselves it's like, no, we're coming in because of what we bring to the table creatively and in terms of our process and how we deliver things. So that was the only struggle I would say in making that jump in from independent smaller projects to a big network funded documentary series. But creatively, I just felt like we really hit our stride in terms of like, Renzi and I would just have these like long conversations and long working sessions where we're planning out the interviews, planning out, before we even shot anything, we had a paper edit of what the series looked like, like beat by beat, based on what we knew from conversations with the subjects. And it was a really exciting moment because it's like we've been hired by the network. Let's fucking kill it. Let's go for it. And Renzi pitched like a really big, sprawling approach to the recreations, and I think that was like our first crack at that. And I think that we even expanded upon it with Pepsi Where's My Jet. And so, moving from Von Dutch to Pepsi, we owned it. Basically our friend
Nick,
and
really quick, not to interrupt you, but just before we go on to Pepsi, I'm curious to know, because I feel like when you're building a production company, and you're building your career as a producer, getting to that, like there's a huge 0 to 1 moment. There are several 0 to 1 moments, but like one of them is obviously getting your first like real project made that's yours. They Fight and Ready for War both qualify, and they kind of scale up from one to the next one, like a little bit. One's a win, the next one's a bit bigger win. I feel like that's a huge turning point, is once you're established enough that real projects are being brought to you as for hire work. What do you feel like what had you guys done successfully enough on They Fight and Ready for War that put you in a position for Hulu to come and say, hey, we want you guys to do this?
I think it's both, first of all, you've sold a couple projects, you've made some money. We got into a film festival. We've got some prestige and critical acclaim. And, when these things get put in front of them, the executives, if they haven't seen it and they watch it, they say like, oh, I dig the vibe. I dig the vision here. And I dig the approach. Like these guys have a thing and have something unique going on, so let's give them a crack at our thing. This story seems like it would fit them well.
And was that a big focus for you guys and for you in terms of building this production company, of getting to that point where you're doing both, like developing your own slate versus taking on projects that are coming in that are for hire?
Wait, sorry, what's the question?
In terms of like, you built your vision for building the production company
Oh,
and like adding that other line of business that is like for hire stuff, of people bringing stuff to you to make for them.
well, listen, I think that ideally, if you can own it and if it's something you've developed and created, then like there's more upside and it's just a better situation. But we're not opposed. Like I think that taking the Von Dutch job was like such an incredible and crucial opportunity at the moment, and moving forward, we're not opposed to it. But just because, with Pepsi Where's My Jet, we developed and owned the project from the onset. It's just like a much more favorable process when that's the case. But again, we're not, again, if somebody brings me the coolest story that ever happened, I'm not gonna shy away from doing it. So
Yeah. And now that we've arrived at Pepsi Where's My Jet, I really want to know how you got this piece of IP, because I've got to imagine the competitive situation. It's such a good story, well-known story.
oh man, this is a good story actually. So our friend, great close friend and fellow producer, he was a EP on the project with us, Andrew Corkin, found the story. And so he was actually pitched the story as a scripted project. And he was kind of like, well, I don't think this is a great scripted story, but this would make a great documentary. Nick Renzi, what do you think about this? We think this is great, but we're into it. Let's start reaching out to the key components to the story. And let's shoot a sizzle. We put a little bit of our own money, probably more than we've ever put. We put about $40,000 into shooting the sizzle for Pepsi. I had been producing a bunch of short form like commercials and branded documentary stuff that year. Basically when it was 2020, so basically when COVID lifted, production opened up, and I just kind of went hog wild producing as much short form stuff as possible. And we had a little bit of money in the bank, so we put some money towards this sizzle, and we were really proud of it. It was awesome. We got boardwalk pictures attached per the recommendation of our agent at WME, because he was like, listen, you guys are, this is a great story, but I think that walking into a buyer like Netflix, it's going to help to have a production company attached that has delivered incredible stuff in the like big, well executed documentary series in the past, like Chef's Table or Last Chance U or Cheer, to name a few of Boardwalk's credits. So we got Boardwalk attached. Everything's really exciting. We have this great sizzle, great deck.
And really quickly, Nick, before you're at that point, you shoot the sizzle. Do you already have the life rights? Like, what IP control do you have at that stage?
So unfortunately, no. That was a mistake that we made, is that we kind of got into shooting on a handshake agreement, which ultimately worked out fine and isn't the end of the world. But where I'm going with this is where things got a little scary for a moment. So we got into a competitive situation, and this is something that happens in the world of documentary and in the world of scripted, where multiple people are after the same story. And so we found, as we were shooting this stuff, that there was another group of filmmakers that were chasing the Pepsi story, and they happened to be the guys that made McMillions. And so we were like, oh fuck, like
And
they're
McMillions was a smash hit, like zeitgeist
Emmy
documentary.
nominated, yeah, all that stuff. So we're kind of like, well, fuck, like these guys are a big deal. They're going after it. We tried to like link up with them and be like, hey, maybe we should all do this together. But like Renzi's going to direct it. And they were like, no, we're going to direct it. And so it was like, well, it's not going to work. And so we had to basically convince John and Todd, the two main characters of the show, that we were the guys. And we're like, we took them to Matsuhisa, got them a nice sushi dinner. And we're just like, listen, like this is an underdog story. We're kind of the underdogs in this situation. We're gonna really do your story justice, and here's our approach. And I'm very proud to say that in a lot of John Leonard's press interviews for the show, he said that there was a vision that Renzi and Nick presented to us of what this documentary would be when we first met them, and what was on the screen was exactly that vision. And so I'm very happy that we delivered for the guys, because honestly, delivering for your subjects is like such a big part of making a documentary. You want the people that you've spent all this time with and who trusted you to tell their story to be happy with what you put out. And so anyways, I just jumped forward a little bit, but we got John and Todd on board.
And were they personally, the two of them, being courted also by the McMillions guys?
Yes, so John and Todd were being courted by the McMillions guys, and we basically we courted them, we got them on board, but the McMillions guys went and sold it to Apple, and we were like, well, fuck, like what are we gonna do? And so even John and Todd are like, well, they already sold it to Apple, like are you guys gonna be able to sell it and like make something happen? And we're like, we're working on, we're sweating, we're like, should we maybe just like go eat BEPs on the McMillions project, and like walk away with our tail between our legs with like $100,000 or something and call it a day? And so, but we would have had to burn Boardwalk. Basically would have had to say like, sorry, we're going to cut our losses and go join this project. And so Renzi and I were like, well, fuck it, should we just go pitch it to Netflix? And and we did, and we sold it to Netflix. So
But how does that work if you don't control it? Like, how do you pitch a project you don't control? How does that work?
basically Netflix they gave us an offer, and they were like, we need, in order to like make this offer happen, you have to have a signed agreement. And so then we went and got a signed agreement with them.
So basically, when you pitched it to Netflix, you're like, look, it's a competitive situation, but we have a good relationship with these guys. If we make them an offer, like we can get this story and get these rights, but we need you to say that you want the project.
I'm not entirely sure what the messaging was. And in fact, we might have even been closing the deal with them as we were setting the pitches and pitching. I don't remember the exact sequencing of it. It might have been that we were like, well, we know that Netflix is going to want this, so we need to close this. So I'm not, I couldn't be sure of what the date, how the sequencing was, but it was all like a little rough and tumble. And ideally, it would have been a little more buttoned up, but because it was a competitive situation, it was a little complicated. Yeah, now that I think about it, I know that we negotiated the terms before we sold it to Netflix because uh yeah, because of the way that the budget worked out and all of that stuff. Yeah.
So then, how were you able to win in a competitive situation where your competitors are more established, are coming off a massive hit that's very similar, and already have a buyer's interest? Like, how were you able to win that situation?
Well, I think that again, like authenticity, like we believed in this story, we believed in our approach and our vision. So that was the key. And we were just, I don't know, we're just the right guys. I felt like for John and Todd, like they just vibe with us better. So that was how we won like the access side of things. And then I think Netflix actually liked the idea that it was competitive because they've had competitive documentaries in the past. Like if you look at the Firefest documentary,
Right.
I think the fact that there was one on Hulu and Netflix drove viewership for both of them. So
Interesting.
I don't think that they felt threatened by Apple or anything. And Yeah, so I think it was less scary than we had initially imagined. It was all pretty like we just Renzi just like killed this pitch, got them super excited about it. And then once it was there, we also pitched to HBO and they wanted it too. We had a bit of a competitive situation,
Mm,
which was really nice.
yeah, that's
Rare
pretty good.
to have two networks, trying to outbid each other, and it was very lucky. And we ended up at Netflix.
Netflix made a better offer, ultimately.
Yes,
Yeah.
they did.
I also feel like the pop culture piece of it does feel a little bit more right at Netflix.
I think that, listen, like I am dying to work with HBO because I think that HBO has like a prestige about it and a level of like uh gravitas that is just so perfect for the world of documentary.
It's pretty
But
good
I
over
do
here, man. Come join us over here.
I would love to, yeah. Let's find the right thing. Tell me what we're doing.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, but I think you're correct. Like especially at this point of our career, it was like I want to make something that as many people see as possible. And, just strictly looking at the numbers, more people have access to Netflix than HBO.
Right.
So felt like the right home for this story that is a very broad appeal, high concept, uh, pop culture documentary.
And can you contextualize what that project has done for you and for North of Now?
I think that, I mean, so the power of Netflix, like as you mentioned, is huge. It's just you really feel it when you're talking to someone on the street and you have a conversation about who are you? What do you do? I'm a filmmaker. Oh, I made Pepsi. Where's my jet? And like the random person you're meeting on the street has seen it and loved it, and it's like, wow, that is so weird and so cool.
Yeah.
Um, so I would say that, I mean, even a little more so than Von Dutch, like a lot of people saw Pepsi, and it's a really cool feeling just like from a personal standpoint, but also from a business standpoint. This one uh really elevated us in the space, and we have a lot of incoming calls, and things are really exciting. It's like a great moment for us to kind of expand our business. I'm hoping to be producing more things from a higher perspective as an EP. And I'm a very hands-on producer. I'm extremely in the weeds. I'm very detail oriented, as I mentioned before. And so my hope is that as we grow and we get a little more money and more support, more projects coming our way, that I can kind of step away from the driver's seat and oversee more things on a higher level, work with more directors, more filmmakers, and really devote my time to the ones that I'm passionate about, but also work with some of the producers that have been growing underneath me, and give them more agency to oversee their projects.
And dude, it's so cool to have like seen a lot of the journey of North of Now, like from as a spectator. Like it's been really dope seeing the company grow, and it's just
You too,
so
man. I remember reading the script for Huracan like
yeah,
long
dude.
before you even shot it, and I was like, all right, this guy's got it going on. I'm gonna stay in touch with this guy.
But it's different, bro. Like it's one thing that I really look at in this industry is I feel like like we were talking about before, what differentiates entertainment from any other industry is that the projects have very little inherent value, which
Yes.
makes people, the executives, the financiers, the studio folks, etc., the network folks, very conservative, and like they're really like they're almost looking for reasons to say no instead of reasons to say yes. And the framework that I have for building a career and getting to a point of like where you want to be as a filmmaker is getting that first hit under your belt, because I feel
Yeah.
like once you've made a hit, whether in that category, whether film, documentary, TV, I feel like you kind of have to do it in each of them, like to get the effect in each category. But like now that
Right.
you have a hit documentary that like is yours, that you guys homegrown, produced, your partner directed it, like have things changed now that you're on the other side with this hit under your belt?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, as I mentioned, there's more incoming calls. We're approaching a moment where we get to be a little more selective about what, you see all these ideas come in and you're like, wow, this is so cool. I want to do it. I want to do that. I want to do that. But the truth is you can only do so many things at once. So you have to really, uh, you know, pick and choose what you really respond to and what you think you're going to enjoy spending your time making. Like you have to pick something that like you're ready to, you know, get out of bed every morning and be excited to tackle it. But be also like, what you think is going to be successful and what's going to make another splash. You want to keep having an impact on the zeitgeist and the conversation, and what people are watching and talking about.
Do you feel like there's more or less pressure on you now compared to pre Pepsi?
It's a great, complicated question. I mean, the overall answer is less. It feels like we have a little bit more, now that we've kind of gotten to this point, it isn't such a fucking grind and like just a struggle to like get people to hear us and like listen to us and think that maybe we might have some good ideas. Like people are willing to listen now, and it's like if we present something, people are going to consider it. They're not going to, they might not like bite on every idea that we present, but we also don't have to feel precious about like, I'm going to show something to our exec at Netflix and he doesn't like it. No problem. He loved our thing. Like we're going to show him another thing that he's going to consider next time. Whereas before it was like, oh my God, if he passes on this, he might think that we're losers and that we don't have good ideas. So there's the overall, there's a little bit more of like, all right, we've done the thing, we've done it a few times and we've like had incremental steps upwards every time. Let's take a breath and enjoy the success, and really be specific about how we move forward because we have the luxury of doing so. And then on the other side, there is this pressure of like, wow, it was such a hit. Are we going to be able to deliver again? but I do believe, I believe in our team and the people around us and our process so much that I know that when we, I have so much confidence in, like, when we find a story that we believe in, when we go on set and we're doing it, I'm like, this is happening and we're going for it. Like, this is going to be great.
It's awesome, bro. And what
Yeah.
would you say for you? Because you've had a unique opportunity as a producer to have this long-standing partnership with a director, who you guys have found obviously like a really successful collaboration. But you've also worked with other directors. Asco is an example. Taste of Sky is an example. Like,
Mhm.
what do you look for in a director to know? Obviously the story concept that they're bringing has to get your attention and has to be that creatively sustaining type of idea, but what about the director are you looking for to know, is this somebody that I'm going to invest my resources into and bet on?
Yeah, that's a great question, because every director has like a totally different style in my experience, and a different approach, different priorities. Um, like Renzi, for example, is like, he's like so uh he's great at making like instant decisions, and but maybe later down the line he'll change his mind, and like that's really good for me, because like um I love like being able to execute and make things happen and not have things sit on the back burner. Like, I like pushing the ball forward. Other directors I've worked for before like to sit and marinate a little bit and before they make their decisions, and like they're like, well, I don't have an answer for you yet. Like, come back to me. And to me, that's a little frustrating, but uh it's their process and I have to respect that, and oftentimes the stress that like sitting and waiting caused me will produce fruitful, results. It's like, okay, now I understand why you needed to take that time, because what you came up with was brilliant, um so what I look for in a director is, what I sorry, my thing is dinging. Let me put my focus on. God damn it. Why is that happening? What I look for in a director is the excitement and the passion that I have about storytelling, Um, I just want to surround myself with people that like love what we're doing and just like get the same satisfaction that I do, and just coming up with solutions and creativity. Like, I mean, I guess it sounds pretty like basic, but uh I don't know. It's a harder question than I thought.
And I ask while you still think, oh, did something come to mind? Well, I ask because I think directing is one of the most misunderstood crafts in entertainment, and I feel like it's something that a lot of people struggle to define because it's a lot of it's invisible. Like
Yeah.
there are the hard skills of like, um, it's a combination of hard and soft skills. The majority that appear to be hard skills are actually soft skills. Like, a director should be hiring great department heads and relying on them, giving them a framework to work in, but then relying on
Yes.
them to make a lot of decisions, right? But at the same, but within that is all the soft skills of collaboration, right? So it's like, I think it's interesting because you could look at the pacing of a project, you could look at the tone of it, you could look at the character arcs, but a lot of that's also what was the editor doing? How much do we have in the can? So it's like, I think you're actually in a really difficult position ultimately of how do you evaluate if someone's a good director or not. That's why I'm curious how somebody like you goes about saying, I'll bet on that person.
I think that at the end of the day, it's this confidence and this belief in the overall vision. I mentioned there's two different kind of styles of directing, where it's like, I know what I want right now, but I might change it later, or I'm gonna hold back before making a decision till I know what's right. Either way, the director knows what they see in the big picture. It's just like a matter of figuring out how to get there. that is the process and the difficulty of directing, right? But when I talk to someone who knows what that big picture is and like is so confident in it, I think that is the director that I want to work with. That's the director that I will bet on.
And so now that you're, in a position, where you can get these docu-series greenlit as streamers, you know what I'm saying? You're making these hit zeitgeist docu-series. What advice would you have for young aspiring filmmakers, whether or not they have access to film school? Like, what could they do? What do you think they should do to launch their career as documentary filmmakers? And like, what could they do, for example, to, put something in front of you that you might want to jump on board?
My advice to aspiring documentary filmmakers. First of all, when you find that story that you think hasn't that X factor, just, you've got to believe in it. And as we talked about earlier, it can't just be like, I want to make the story about this topic. You got to find the entry point that makes it unique and exciting. Once you found that subject and you found that entry point, you've got to be tenacious and you've got to just go for it. You've got to be excited about it and you've got to like live and breathe it until it becomes a reality, is kind of the most basic way of saying it. Because in documentary, I mean, in scripted as well, it's like until you've got cameras rolling, you have to believe in the vision of what it's going to be 100% and know that it's a good idea in order to show everyone else that it's a good idea. When people aren't necessarily buying ideas in the pitch room, they're buying you. They're buying your passion for it, your excitement for it. I could go and pitch like the coolest idea, like a story that on paper is like the coolest thing, but if my pitch sucks and I don't sound excited about it, no one's going to buy it.
Right.
You have to like live and breathe this thing and fucking believe in it. And that's, I think, the most important part of it.
I think you're so right to bring up the fact how important it is to know how to pitch something, because I've personally found in my own life that I've even gotten to the point where I won't even develop an idea, a TV show, a movie, a documentary, until I know how I can pitch it to somebody really effectively. Because
Right.
if you can't pitch something well, and by pitch something well, it means you meet anybody, a stranger on the street, a family member, a studio executive, and within 30 seconds, articulate your idea in such a way that they're interested to hear more. It's really as simple as that. Like, can you articulate the story concept in 30 seconds or less in such a way that anybody listening would be like, oh, that's cool. Like, so what happens, or tell me more about it. Like, until I can do that, I personally, as a filmmaker, don't have the confidence in that idea to really pursue it. And if I can't crack it, I just don't pursue it, because you have to pitch the project so many hundreds of times over the life of a project, from
Totally.
collaborators to financiers to studios to like, ultimately they're looking at it the same way. They're like, how are we going to pitch it to audiences? So it's like that pitch, that kernel of the pitch is like the lifeblood of the project from day one to day 1,000 when it's put in front of audiences. So I could not agree more that that's like, knowing how to pitch it effectively is so foundational.
Yeah. Yeah. And be excited about it, like I would say that was like in the early stages of my career, I was maybe like during Ready for War, I was like too excited about it. It was like consumed me. It was all I could think about was this story that I was doing. But I think that the passion that my team has for the things that we do and like that we have for working with each other and getting the project from development to distribution is what makes the magic. It's why I love doing what I do. And it's why I think that the content is good. It's like we love it, we're passionate about it, we get everyone else to believe in it, and we make it happen, and that's what I hope to continue doing for the rest of my career.
And one thing I would add to that is I also think documentary is a unique format, much unlike television or film, where you get somewhat of an allowance on like production quality for your first thing and for your proof of concept. Like if you want to be a documentary filmmaker, you have all the tools available to you with an iPhone and like a microphone to go and make a short documentary proof of concept of your story that can serve as the pitch tool to go and raise more money to make a feature doc, a docu-series, etc. So I
Yes.
really feel like it's actually the best way for filmmakers, even if you did want to focus on film or TV. I actually think now that documentary and making short documentaries is actually the best way to launch your career, because if you can find a good story, everyone, you get the allowance from the audience in terms of how it's actually presented if the story works, you know?
Correct. Yeah. And I mean, you know, I think even before documentaries started becoming a thing, the way that a director got into doing features was that they would put together a short and they'd get that short into a festival. And then they, you know, people would at that festival would see it and be like, this is an amazing short. Let's give this guy a feature, you know? So documentary kind of is like an even easier step towards that, where it's like all you have to have is like a semi decent camera and a great story and an approach to telling that story.
And my last question, or I have two more questions for you, and then we're done. And I appreciate your time because we're 2.5 hours in right now. Is
Of course.
what's one thing that you do every day that's part of your process that could be a productivity thing, could be an organizational thing? What's something that you do that maybe everyone else doesn't do that you could have picked up from Chuck or from John, or that you discovered on your own? What's something that you do that helps you be successful?
So something that I do that I picked up from John actually is I just have like a list of my slate of every project that it's a Google Doc, you know, so I'm editing it in real time. And it's like every project that's whether it's in production, post-production, or development. And it's just like, what is the actionable step on this? What is the next deadline? What is this? So I just like have everything that I'm working on in front of me. And, you know, I don't work on everything every day, but I look at everything every day. You know, some of these projects are like as simple as following up with someone and getting an answer. Some of them is like write an entire, you know, development outline, you know, treatment deck, et cetera, which takes like multiple steps of you know, research and development and writing and notes and all that stuff. But so some of it's big tasks, some of it's little tasks, but I can see it all in front of me. And actually Renzi, my partner, and I, we share this document so that we're kind of like delineating who's doing what, and there's this visibility of like our whole slate, who's doing what needs to happen. And but other than that, the approach is fairly random because as a producer, it's like you never know what's going to land on you. You know, you set out to do one thing one day and then something lands on your plate and you're like, oh fuck, I need to push that off to tomorrow or next week because now I got to handle this thing. So um yeah. And
Dude,
then yeah,
that's great, man. I have something very similar, and I don't know how people operate without something like that, because what I've found in on the producing side is like you it's too easy to be overwhelmed by like the enormity of getting the project, like making the project a win. And I think it's much more practical and like effective to say what's the immediate next step that has to happen for this thing
yep,
to just even move 1 inch forward today.
correct, exactly. And that's like I mean, that's a bigger like lifestyle approach thing because like I have, you know, I get anxiety and all this stuff. And, you know, being able to compartmentalize your life
Mhm.
is, you know, an important part of living a productive, motivated, and efficient lifestyle. But it's also, in terms of being a filmmaker, very useful.
So my last question for you is, if you think about yourself, you put yourself at 80 years old, you know, and this is the Bezos like regret minimization framework, like at 80 years old, and you look back to Nick right now, and obviously I know in your personal life you have like there's so much changing and a lot of incredible things happening. But if you look at your life as a filmmaker, what would be the thing that you regret not doing, you know, or regret doing the most, you know, if you try to put yourself at 80 and look back to right now?
Oh man. That's a pretty intense question. And the place that my mind gravitates towards is like I want to know that, like, obviously we all want to be successful. We want to win awards. We want to make money. That's all great. We want to have creative integrity and tell amazing stories. But the thing that I want to make sure stays true throughout my career is the trust, the respect, and the love for the people around me, my collaborators. I want to always support and feel supported by those people, and just proceed in my career with truth and honesty and love, because there is so much love in my team and like with what we do. And I don't ever want to stop having fun. I show up when I show up on set, like there's a bunch of bullshit that in this job that sucks, like deal making and egos and headaches and whatever. But when I'm on set and things are happening, it is just so much fun. And we're traveling together, we're getting to set, we're bullshitting around, making jokes, and we're on set and we're bullshitting around and making jokes, but we're killing it and we're taking it seriously at the same time. And that's like what I enjoy the most about it. And I don't ever want to lose that. So when I'm 80 years old, I would rather be like moderately successful and know that I had a fucking blast the whole time than be like rich beyond belief and be like a miserable, angry bastard.
I love that, man. Yeah, absolutely. I think I might take the opposite side of that. I think I'll be the miserable old fuck if I had this like project that'll live forever, but maybe that's something I'm still
Um,
working through.
that's true. That's a tough one. Yeah, to
So,
be like to be like
like the guy from There Will Be Blood, you know?
breaker. Yeah. Wait, the
Yeah.
guy from what?
There will be blood, in his
Oh yeah,
mansion.
yeah. Daniel Plainview.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Exactly.
where could, if somebody wants to follow you and kind of like see the projects you guys are working on, what would be a good place for them to follow you?
Well, we're actually working on getting our website fixed right now. It's kind of janky right now, but northofnow.com, we're hoping to get it much more up and running now that we're a lot more legit and have a lot more projects and exciting things going on. So, yeah, follow our website, I guess.
You don't have Twitter or anything, do you?
I have Instagram, but it's not that exciting. I post like once every 6 months when
It's
something.
mostly your dog. Yeah, yeah.
It's
And
my
then
dog.
soon it'll be your kid, that'll
It's
be
my dog. I just had a baby gender reveal post. It's my dog, and then like when like when a project comes out, so But yeah, Instagram is Boak and website is northofnow.com.
Nick, man. Thank you so much for your time, bro. I really enjoyed this, and I think it's a valuable conversation for filmmakers to listen to, man. So thank you for your time.
Of course, thank you for having me. I hope that this was helpful, and I hope that it can be helpful to aspiring filmmakers or anybody at any level. So, I've still got a lot to figure out myself and a long road ahead of me, but I feel pretty good about where I'm at now. So
You
happy to
should.
help.
That's the end of the episode. I truly hope you enjoyed it and you learned something from it. If you did, please support us, support our mission here by subscribing to this channel, liking this video, and consider sharing it with one person you think might enjoy or learn something from this conversation. Hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for listening.